For most of our lives, the act of listening to music has been anchored by this one, almost sacred symbol,
Right.
the play button. You just press it, you sit back, and the artist takes the wheel. It's like this unwritten contract. They speak, you listen.
It is the ultimate one-way street. I mean, it's a perfectly packaged, completely immutable product delivered straight from the creator to your ears.
Yeah, exactly. But, well, what happens when that one-way street turns into this massive multi-lane intersection
Oh, yeah.
where you, the actual listener, are actively directing the traffic?
Yeah.
Today, we are dissecting a really fascinating February 2026 analysis from MMR, and it's titled The Future of Interactive Music Experience.
Which is such a massive topic right now.
It really is. And the whole mission of this deep dive today is to look at, well, basically the death of the traditional play button as we know it. We're moving from music as this passive product we just consume into a dynamic environment that we actively participate in.
This huge paradigm shift.
It's huge. Okay, let's unpack this, because if you love music, this completely upends your role in the equation.
It really does. We are basically witnessing the evolution of music from a played work into a participatory environment.
Right.
And the goal here isn't just to gawk at the shiny new tech making this possible, though the tech is incredible.
Oh, absolutely.
We really need to explore the underlying philosophy of this shift, the actual mechanics of how it functions and why these developments are completely rewriting the very definition of a listener.
Okay, so before we map out, how we got here or the visionaries driving it, let's establish what this actually looks and sounds like in the wild right now.
Good idea.
Because the MMR column, it outlines this pretty intense matrix of core mechanisms driving interactive music.
Right, there are quite a few.
Yeah, we're talking about real-time reactions
Yeah.
where your input alters the sound, branching structures, spatial audio, algorithmic generation, and network synchronization.
It's a lot.
It's a ton. I mean, if you're just a casual listener, that sounds way more like a software engineering syllabus than like a Saturday night playlist.
Yeah, I completely get that. It does sound highly technical. But let's just break down the underlying logic of a couple of those mechanisms to see how they function musically.
Please do.
So take branching structures, for example. In a traditional track, the bridge always follows the chorus. Period.
Right, it's locked in.
Exactly. But in an interactive environment, the software is constantly evaluating user input. So maybe that's where your avatar is standing in a virtual space or even just where you're looking.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's crossfading between different compositional stems in real time based on that data. The composer actually has to write these complex transition matrices that ensure the tempo, the key, and the rhythm match perfectly, regardless of which branch you trigger.
And then when you layer in algorithmic generation, where, an AI is actually composing notes on the fly based on probability models, the complexity just goes off the charts. It completely changed how I visualize the listening experience.
How so?
Well, I used to think of interactive music like driving a 4x4 off-road vehicle,
Okay, I like that.
right? Like traditional music is a train on a fixed track, and interactive music lets you drive off-road.
Right, you have agency.
Yeah. But that metaphor still sort of implies the landscape is already there,
Yeah.
just waiting for you to explore it. With algorithmic generation and branching structures, it's more like you're driving a car and the road is being paved inches ahead of your tires in real time.
Yes.
And whether that pavement is asphalt or dirt or cobblestone, it depends entirely on how hard you're pressing the gas pedal or, the temperature outside.
That is a much more accurate framework. What's fascinating here is that the landscape itself is generative.
Right.
When you combine spatial audio, where specific stems have physical three-dimensional coordinates in your headphones, with real-time reactions and algorithmic generation, the music becomes this living, breathing ecosystem.
It's wild to think about.
It really is, because your specific choices, your physical movements, and the AI's real-time calculations are constantly interacting in this continuous feedback loop. So it ensures that no two playback experiences are ever identical.
Never.
Never. You could boot up the exact same interactive track twice and traverse two completely different sonic landscapes.
Which is just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting. When we talk about AI and procedural generation and spatial audio ecosystems, my brain immediately anchors to the present day.
Sure.
I just think of this as a mid-2020s phenomenon. Yet the roots of musical interactivity, they're surprisingly old.
Oh, very old.
Yeah, we aren't just inventing this today, we're just kind of playing with sharper tools.
Exactly. The underlying desire to escape the static recording predates digital technology entirely.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Early tape manipulation and live improvisation in the mid-20th century were, conceptually at least, the first forms of changing music. Musicians were physically interacting with the medium to alter the playback in real time.
Just cutting and splicing tape on the fly.
Yeah. Right. But the true architectural foundation of what we are talking about today, like the actual digital bedrock, that was poured in 1983 with the establishment of the MIDI standard.
The musical instrument digital interface.
That's the one.
Because most people just know MIDI as the cable that lets a keyboard talk to a laptop. But philosophically, it was a massive paradigm shift. It basically decoupled the performance from the audio waveform.
And that decoupling is the crucial turning point.
Right.
Before MIDI, recorded sound was a fixed, baked audio file. It was locked in time. MIDI standardized the treatment of music as a collection of events.
Selection of event. Right.
It doesn't actually record the sound of a piano. It records the data parameters. Like this specific note was triggered at this specific velocity and held for exactly this many milliseconds.
So if the music is just a string of data events, you can intercept that data and change the parameters on the fly right before the sound ever even reaches the speaker. Like, if the user does action X, change the MIDI velocity to Y. And that logic basically became the engine for the 1990s evolution of game music.
It did.
And this is the part of the timeline that absolutely delights me, honestly. The pioneers teaching us about interactive audio design weren't sitting in, like, high-end academic studios. They were at Nintendo.
Yes, the 8-bit and 16-bit eras were huge for this.
Right. We're looking at Super Mario Bros. In '85 and The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time in '98. The music didn't just loop. It was situational. The tempo shifted dynamically. Layers dropped in and out based on, like, how close you were to an enemy.
It was incredibly innovative for the time.
It really was. But I do want to push back slightly on framing this as a perfectly straight line.
Okay, go ahead.
I understand that a dynamic MIDI track in a '90s Zelda game reacts to the player, but is that really the same foundational concept as a neural network dynamically generating a hyper-personalized track for me today? I mean, the mechanics seem fundamentally divorced from one another.
Oh, the mechanics are absolutely divorced. There's no question there.
Right.
A 64-bit console triggering MIDI layers based on proximity thresholds is, well, it's primitive compared to a neural network processing real-time biometric data.
Exactly.
However, the design philosophy is an unbroken lineage.
Okay, the philosophy.
Yes. The fundamental thesis that the listener state dictates the acoustic environment that remains constant. What we see instead is that interactive music isn't experiencing this slow, gradual evolution. It undergoes radical redefinition with every major technological leap.
So the conceptual goal stays exactly the same, but the sandbox we're playing in expands exponentially.
Precisely.
Because in the '90s, the tool was game logic.
Yeah.
Then in the 2000s, broadband internet arrived, and the tool became network synchronization.
Right. The MMORPG boom.
Yeah, we have these massive multiplayer online games syncing dynamic audio states across millions of clients simultaneously so that thousands of people experience a shared, responsive audio environment.
And then the 2010s introduced consumer-grade VR, AR, and these advanced streaming infrastructures.
Oh, right.
We see titles like Beat Saber making physical movement the primary audio trigger. And you can't forget those massive live concert events inside Fortnite, where spatial audio gave music actual physical coordinates in a virtual world.
That was wild to experience.
It really was. Which brings us directly into the current era, where we have machine learning algorithms and real-time generative models actually embedded in our production tools.
So if the technology is constantly shifting from, 8-bit cartridges all the way to neural networks, the people steering this ship can't just be traditional songwriters anymore.
Not at all.
It requires this completely hybrid mindset. It's really a cross-disciplinary collision of composers, developers, and technologists.
You really cannot separate the technical architecture from the artistic output in this field. I mean, look at the visionaries who built this space.
Like Brian Eno.
Exactly. In 1978, Brian Eno's music for airports basically laid the conceptual foundation for generative ambient music.
Right.
He designed systems of tape loops of varying lengths that would continually fall into different, unpredictable mathematical relationships with one another. He wasn't just composing notes, he was composing a system.
The system. And then you have the gaming pioneers dealing with the absolute extreme of hardware limitations, like Koji Kondo, popularizing that situational interactivity we talked about.
Yes.
But then Yuzo Koshiro, he was famously designing incredibly complex dynamic track structures while fighting against the brutal memory constraints of early 16-bit hardware.
It's amazing what he achieved.
Yeah, he had to be a programmer just as much as a musician to force those chips to respond interactively.
And constraints often force the most elegant design solutions. But, as processing power caught up, the physical interface itself became the site of innovation.
Right.
Consider Imogen Heap's development of the Mimu glove.
I've seen videos of those. They're incredible.
They are. Rather than turning knobs or automating parameters on a laptop, she uses complex hand gestures. The gloves use flex sensors and gyroscopes to map the posture of her hand to specific MIDI parameters.
So she's literally shaping the sound with her hands.
Exactly. A clenched fist might shorten a reverb tail, while a sweeping arm motion opens a low-pass filter. She is physically sculpting the audio in three-dimensional space during a live performance.
Which fundamentally changes the visual language of live music, too. It's so theatrical.
It really is.
But, the architect who really stretches my understanding of this entire field is Holly Herndon.
Ah,
Yeah.
yes, Proto-O.
Yeah, her work, specifically that album Protodo, is a prime example of using AI not as a gimmick or a shortcut, but as a true co-creator.
Right.
She trained an AI model, I think she called it Spawn on her own voice and the voices of her choir. And the AI processes that training data and generates entirely new sonic ideas, creating this wild feedback loop between the human singers and the machine.
It's a brilliant project.
It is, but it raises a major philosophical hurdle for me. If Holly Herndon is utilizing a neural network as a co-creator, who is actually the artist here?
Yeah.
I mean, is she still the composer, or has she just built the sandbox for the AI to play in?
See, that tension is at the very core of this entire paradigm shift. In the realm of interactive music, the traditional role of the composer is just insufficient. The artist must transition into an experienced designer.
An experienced designer. So the artistry is actually in the architecture itself.
Precisely. The shape of the sandbox, the texture of the sand, the algorithms governing the tools you leave inside it, those parameters dictate the emotional resonance of what can be built.
That makes a lot of sense.
The curation and the underlying philosophy of the designer are just as critical as the sonic artifacts being generated. We saw the digital milestones for this transition years ago, actually.
Like what?
Well, think of the game Rez in 2001, which tightly synchronized the player's operations with the musical beat, basically turning the player into a synesthetic performer.
Right.
Or Journey in 2012, which pioneered this incredibly profound shared online musical space. The creators of those experiences didn't just write a score, they engineered a psychological state for the user to inhabit.
Okay, so if composers are now experienced designers building these virtual sandboxes, that completely upends the traditional music industry structure we've relied on for, what, a century?
Pretty much.
So how is the wider culture actually absorbing this shockwave? Because we're not just talking about avant-garde art installations anymore. We're talking about a fundamental shift in how the average person interacts with sound.
Well, the cultural earthquake really breaks down into four major industry shifts.
Okay.
The first is the most intimate, and that's the transition from passive to active consumption. The act of listening is elevated to a participatory act. Your presence, your inputs, or your biometric state actively shape the output.
So you evolve from a listener to a participant.
Exactly, and then to a co-creator, and ultimately a node in a networked experience.
And the second shift is the deep, inextricable fusion of music and gaming. Because the gaming market commands such massive cultural capital and is inherently interactive, music production across the board now often assumes interactive design as a baseline.
Right.
The technical skills used to score a dynamic game environment are bleeding into how mainstream pop albums are conceived and delivered.
And that fusion naturally forces the third shift, which is the redefinition of live music.
Oh, like the Fortnite concerts.
Exactly. When millions of people can participate simultaneously in a shared online space, experiencing real-time spatial audio that reacts to the collective crowd mechanics, you completely remove the physical boundaries and the acoustics of a traditional concert hall.
Which brings us to the fourth shift.
Yep.
And honestly, this is the one that gives me genuine anxiety.
Oh, why is that?
Changes in the industrial structure of music itself. I mean, if musicians are transitioning into providers of experience design, writing a brilliant chord progression just isn't enough anymore. There is a growing necessity for cross-disciplinary knowledge.
Yes, the skill floor is rising.
We're talking about user experience design, Python programming, spatial acoustic engineering. I have to stop here and push back.
Go for it.
I hear the theory, but doesn't this inherently stack the deck against traditional artistry? So what does this all mean? Does my favorite scruffy indie band, who writes amazing acoustic guitar songs in their garage, do they now need to hire a UX designer just to release an EP?
It's a very real concern, and it's a tension the industry is actively wrestling with right now. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, it's important to view this as an expansion of the ecosystem, not an outright replacement of the fixed medium.
Okay,
The traditional, meticulously crafted album isn't dying, much like painting didn't die when cinema was invented.
that's a good point.
However, the avenues for monetization and engagement are fracturing.
But doesn't the algorithm inherently favor artists who provide interactive, data-rich stems over a locked stereo file?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if streaming platforms are pivoting to hyper-personalized, generative environments, won't traditional fixed acoustic music just get buried under the weight of all this interactive content?
The attention economics will undoubtedly shift. And discoverability might heavily favor interactive formats in certain environments, like, say, fitness apps or immersive virtual spaces.
Right.
But the value of a definitive, authorial statement, a fixed audio experience where the artist retains total control of the emotional arc that remains incredibly potent, it just becomes one distinct choice among many.
So there's still a place for it.
Absolutely. Your indie band can still record their garage album for a lean-back listening experience, but they might also license their isolated stems to an interactive platform
Oh, I see.
that allows a generative engine to dynamically remix their song's tempo and instrumentation based on the listener's environment. So the artist's role expands to encompass both the definitive text and the interactive toolkit.
Okay, framing it as lean back versus lean forward consumption makes it feel a lot less apocalyptic to me.
Good.
Which natural brings us to the horizon line, right?
Right.
And where's this all heading next? The MMR analysis lays out a roadmap for the near future, and it starts by clarifying a major misconception. Interactive music is not a genre.
No, it's wrong.
It is a methodology. It's a way of delivering audio that applies equally to ambient soundscapes, aggressive club music, and mainstream pop anthems.
And another critical clarification involves the role of AI.
Right, the elephant in the room.
Exactly. There is a persistent fear that generative models will entirely replace human composers.
Yeah, you hear that constantly.
But the reality of the near future is that AI's role remains auxiliary. Human curation, that experience design we discussed, is the bottleneck for emotional resonance. An AI can generate endless permutations of a C major scale, but it takes human intention to design the interactive framework that makes those notes feel meaningful to a participant.
Right.
AI is the instrument, not the artist.
And thankfully, accessing this future doesn't require prohibitive hardware.
No, not at all.
You don't need a $3,000 haptic VR rig to participate. Standard smartphones and web browsers already possess the processing power and sensor arrays necessary to deliver rich, spatialized, interactive music environments.
They do.
But the prediction that absolutely fascinates me is the integration of biofeedback.
Oh, biofeedback represents the frontier of hyper-personalization. We are talking about utilizing the sensor data already being collected by wearables, heart rate variability, galvanic skin response, core temperature, physical cadence as the actual control parameters for an algorithmic music engine.
So practically speaking, picture this. You're going for a run, you have your smartwatch on, and it's reading your vitals.
Right.
You hit a steep incline, your heart rate spikes, your breathing gets shallow, you're struggling to maintain pace.
We've all been there.
Right, so your wearable transmits that biometric stress data to your interactive music app. The engine analyzes the data and dynamically alters the track you're listening to. The BPM subtly ramps up to match and encourage your physical cadence. The key shifts from a melancholic minor to an aggressive, driving major chord progression.
Yes.
And the spatial audio actually pushes the rhythm section slightly forward in the mix to propel you up the hill.
It is the ultimate realization of the participatory environment. The soundscape adapts to your biological reality in real time.
It's just wild.
And this highlights the ultimate thesis of the interactive music shift. The future doesn't actually depend on the underlying technology itself.
It doesn't.
No. Machine learning, biofeedback arrays, spatial audio rendering, those are merely the mechanical tools. The future depends entirely on the philosophy of experience design. It's about the human intention and the psychological empathy behind how we use those tools to foster a deeper connection between the art and the participant.
It's an incredible journey to trace. We started this deep dive looking at pioneers physically cutting and splicing magnetic tape in the 70s.
Yep.
We moved through the ingenious memory hacks of 16-bit video game composers, and now we've arrived at a horizon where neural networks and biofeedback algorithms are co-creating real-time soundtracks tailored to our physiological stress levels.
It's been quite a ride.
The play button really is turning into a steering wheel. Thank you so much for guiding us through the mechanics and the philosophy of this material. It has completely rewired how I'm going to look at my own music library.
It's a fascinating architectural shift to break down, really. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a consideration that builds directly on that concept of biofeedback and algorithmic generation.
Okay, hit me.
We are designing systems capable of reading our physiological markers, our heart rate, our skin conductivity, our breathing patterns, to generate hyper-personalized audio environments in milliseconds.
Right, the system reacts to our biology.
But consider the psychological implications of that feedback loop. If the algorithm is constantly monitoring your biometric data, it will likely detect subtle shifts in your physiological baseline before you consciously register them yourself.
Well, wow.
Imagine a scenario where the system senses your subconscious stress markers rising. Without you prompting it, the interactive track dynamically shifts its harmonic structure, lowering the tempo and introducing soothing binaural frequencies specifically designed to downregulate your nervous system.
That is
It
intense.
calms you down before you even realize you were anxious. If the system is reading our hidden biological states and manipulating the audio to manage our emotions, are we still listening to the music, or is the music listening to us?
Wow, I'll be thinking about that all week. That is a wild, slightly unnerving, but incredibly profound frontier to cross. Definitely something for you to mull over the next time you put your headphones on and assume you're the one in control of the playlist. Keep exploring, keep questioning the world around you, and thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.